All right, let's move into some degree days here. So here is all the stations in the general area, and I'll just look at base 42 here, starting to see a little bit of stretch from south to north. Belding is a little bit of a hot spot, so is Clarksville, not very much, maybe a half a day ahead of other areas on the ridge. The Sparta station just finally crossed the 290 mark, base 42. Standale's always a little warm spot with 339. So they're a couple days ahead growth-wise as well. One thing that's interesting is at the very bottom here, a week ago we were about 5 days behind base 42, and we quickly went 9 days behind. We basically didn't move forward at all on degree days, but we moved forward in time. So you can see we're 9 days behind base 42 for the Sparta station. We're 15 days behind base 50, which shouldn't surprise anybody because we've been getting 0 degrees base 50 for the past several days. That's going to change with the forecast that's coming. I did want to talk a little bit about the cold weather and just remind you, in case you don't know, where you can find. I'm going to show you some tables that show you the cold temperatures overnight. In case you didn't know, if you go to your whatever local weather station you use, this is Sparta, this is the kind of home page for every station. So you make sure you're at the right place where it says Sparta. If you need to choose another station, you can go up here to the top to the drop-down menu, choose your station, and then make sure you click this button that says change station. It doesn't update automatically. It's very annoying, but it is what it is. But if you want to see, there's all kinds of various information, but right here is overnight temperatures / hours below freezing. So if you click on this link, it takes you to a page that looks like this with all these hourly data for the last few days. And so if you went there today, it would automatically choose today's date, May 13th. And that's what you'd see here. But if you want to choose a different date, so if I want to go back in time to that really cold night on between the 8th and the 9th, you would just change the date to whatever date you want back in time, and then click get report. And so you get this table like this. So here's the overnight lows from going from 5/8 into 5/9, Friday night into Saturday. And anytime the temperature drops below 32, it changes that box to red. So this is a pretty ominous looking table if you just take the red into consideration, and seeing how quickly things warmed up once we got past 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. So a lot of variability. It got colder than expected, I think, in some places, and then warmer than expected in some places. And it was probably mainly due to cloud cover being there or not being there. It was pretty important. There was really no inversion, so that when the clouds move in, of course, there was wind all night. This was an advective freeze. It was just a cold air mass. I mean, there was extremely cold air at the 500 to 1,000 foot mark and higher. It's amazing it didn't get colder, quite honestly. So if we just look at the Sparta station, I mean, as soon as the sun went down, it was cold all day. It was not very warm to begin with, but as soon as the sun went down, the temperatures just bottomed out, and you can see that slow progression. And the lowest it got looks like 25.3 here, but between 5 and 6 a.m. So that's the lowest temperature in the hour. So it was a little scary getting up in the morning and going out to cut some buds. There were some areas that were colder than expected. I'll show you the Elbridge Hart area. They're a little bit farther behind us, but they got down to 21.5, 22. So pretty cold. I think there's some extensive fruit damage up there, tart cherries in particular, and we're still kind of waiting to hear what's going on with apples. So most of the areas on the ridge got down to that 24, 25 mark at the weather stations. So knowing that you have lower spots, I'm sure people had colder temperatures to report. If I change the date to yesterday morning, because we had a cold again yesterday morning, a lot less red. See all the red here from Saturday, a lot less red. So the temperatures were cold, but not nearly as severe. So some 28s, and Ludington had a 25, 26. They are behind us in growth stage, so that hopefully doesn't hurt them too bad. And then for this morning, a little bit more, I'm sorry, that was not right. This morning, even less red. So some places never even got below freezing. And there was a wonderful inversion last night. I don't know, Phil, if you went and looked at that on the Sparta Tower, but there was almost 9 or 10 degrees inversion. So definitely the frost fans would have helped you last night. So I think I'm gonna let Phil talk. We'll talk about damage a little bit later. I just wanted to point out, I didn't want to rub salt in the wound, but I just pointed out in case you didn't know where you could get those overnight lows for the weather stations. Looking ahead, though, it's going to do just what it did last year. It was cold, stayed cold for quite a long time, and then the thermostat just turned up, and that's exactly what's going to happen. I think it's pretty safe to say that this morning, last night was probably the last time you're going to have to do any late nights with frost. Because it looks like we're definitely turning the corner here into more seasonable weather. These are temperatures that we should be experiencing. And then, of course, with that comes rain. So we were in a not much rain forecast until we get some warmer weather moving in and convection starts. So they're calling for showers and thunderstorms. This is Channel 8's forecast, calling for showers and thunderstorms Thursday, maybe some rain Friday, and this doesn't show it so much, but on our call yesterday, Jeff Andreessen talked about being pretty significant rainfall for Saturday into Sunday. Overall, by the time this is done in the next 3 or 4 days, some places could have almost as much as 2 inches of rain. So warmer, but then that brings some rain. This is the Wonderground or AccuWeather forecast looking ahead, and you can see of most notable is this blue line here in this first set of graphs. If you can see my mouse moving, I hope you can. Nothing is going below freezing. None of the daily, even the daily lows aren't even getting close to this blue line, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So much kinder temperatures. Also, as this weather system moves in for Thursday, you can see that the black line is barometric pressure, so that's dropping down. That's what's going to bring some chance of rainfall, and also it's going to bring some wind with it. So hopefully for those of you that are listening in your tractor cab, you're getting your fungicide on, and maybe even your pink spray if you haven't done that yet, because it's going to be this is the day to get that done. I expect to catch some pretty big numbers for spore discharge for apple scab. It's been sitting and waiting for pretty much all spring. So we're hitting that time when any rain event like this is going to really be, chances of being an apple scab infection are good. I'll come back to that. Looking ahead, this is the information about, well, it's all the degree days for Sparta Station up until today, the 13th. So, and using base 42 that we use for tree development. So we've been stuck here in this tight cluster stage forever, it seems like. And now we moved a little, and as we get these warmer temperatures now looking forward, the degree days start adding up to more normal numbers, 20, 18, 16, 17. And then looking out past the 20th, these are normal degree day accumulation, space 42 for the Sparta Station for the normal averages for 40 years of data. So 16, 17 are normal amounts. So we're going to move quickly into pink. These, remember, this is for Macintosh, so some things are already there and some things are farther behind. But move to pink, king bloom, and full bloom. I've been getting a lot of emails, I'm sure Phil has too, and text message about when is bloom going to be. People want to take pictures and things. Full bloom for Macintosh, just according to the model. Of course, trees and sites are all different, but sometime about a week from now. So we're going to move more normally. We're not going to move fast through these growth stages, faster than normal. We're just going to move normally through these stages. I'm going to skip that. So moving on to insects a little bit. This is almost the exact same report as last week. Nothing has happened really nothing's changed. So insects are lying in wait a little bit for warmer weather. So by this time next week, we'll probably have more insect activity to talk about. I would expect black stem borer probably over the weekend. We'll start hearing of more numbers. There was a little trap catch a couple weeks ago with those couple warm days on a weekend, but nothing significant. But I bet you they'll really get moving in the next 10 days. There are small leaf roller larvae out there. Those will become probably easier to find out in growing terminals as weather warms up too. Aphids, I just occasionally see an apple grain aphid if I'm out there. I have not seen rosy apple aphids. They're probably there. And you target, that's one of your big targets at your pink spray. San Jose scale are still in their overwintering scale stage. Typically, the next timing is out several weeks from now. European red mite, I actually spent some time doing a little more looking for red mite eggs, and every little cluster I find of them, they're very healthy. I don't see any black or clear looking eggs, so I don't think there was any overwintering mortality. So if you had problem blocks with red mites last year, probably better to be on the front edge of trying to manage them with your petal fall miticides than delaying too long, because I think they're going to be timed very well for petal fall and higher activity. Oriental fruit moth, we've been catching a few moths just here and there. They're just not active, but that's going to change. Typically right around pink is when we really catch them, and around 315 growing degree days. Base 45 is kind of my normal average biofix, and we're only at 200 degree days base 45. So I think I'm not going to set a biofix yet until we get some more routine or regular flight going on. It's too scattered right now to call it a true biofix. No codling moth anywhere in the state. I expect, though, in the southwest part of the state, we might hear of some flight coming up in the next week. So we'll be, 10 days from now, probably, starting with perhaps some codling moth flight. So you want to get your mating disruption up if you're going to be using that. I haven't seen any plant bugs. We haven't seen mullein bug in a lot of years. And it's one that rears its ugly head every few years. And this year with, it being, I don't want to say it's difficult to get pink sprays on, but some people put them on quite a while ago. Some people are just getting to it, and maybe you're stretching out that time where your insecticide is there between normal pink and petal fall timing. And that's when mullein bug can creep in. It's an insect that comes in during bloom time typically. And sometimes it's more of a problem near alfalfa fields, or if right after they get mowed, and if it's at the same time as bloom. So just keep an eye on it. It's not one we can really predict, but when it's bad, it can be bad. And the rest of these are all real minor pests. Spotted tenniform leaf miner don't seem to mind the cold. They're still flying, but numbers are on the low side. And red banded seems to have picked up a little bit in their numbers. Again, not something you really would be too concerned about. So I'm going to move into scab here quickly. I only put up the Sparta table, and I have the Standale table. So we had, since we last met, we had this little light rain here of just a couple hundredths of an inch. Not everybody got it, but it started during the lunch hour. It was only wet for a couple hours. I was quite surprised to go out and collect my spore rods and find that there were 1,373 spores in that short little light rain after it had been dry for such a long time. So that, to me, is a little warning sign that the warmer weather that's coming and the extended rainfall for the next few days is probably going to give me some of my highest spore numbers. Did you have something, Phil, you wanted to say?
Your screen didn't change until just now, so maybe it was my internet. But yeah, now we're on apple scab.
Okay, thank you. So it should, I've been calling these numbers back here in these earlier wetting events in late April, the 10,000, 11,000 as medium spore index. So I really think I'm going to catch some pretty extreme numbers over the next 2 weeks. And that's typical during the bloom period when we catch some of our highest numbers. I did put in the degree days for up till yesterday, 425 degree days. That comes out to about 45% mature spores. So we got a ways to go yet. They'll mature quickly, and then we need the rains, of course, to discharge them. I did find some lesions on the backside of spur leaves from this rain event, the very first infection back here on Green Tip, where we had almost 40 hours of wetting. It was cool, but and very low spore numbers, and very little green tissue showing as well. That's why they're on the backside of the spur leaves, because that's all that was exposed at that time. So just keep an eye open. There was a little more scab around last year. And so a little higher inoculum coming into this year, you're going to want to make sure you're watching closely. The last big and heavy infection we had there with those 2 days of rain, this keeps changing. It goes to the 20th of May, and sometimes it's the 17th. I think it's because the forecast is so wonky. So just be watching for scab from this big heavy infection. Remember, it rained quite heavily, and it was hard to get back out and get things covered up again. So I would fully expect to find some breaks and some blocks that might end up with some scab, particularly on things like Macs and that are particularly susceptible to apple scab. This is the RimPro output for the next several days. And if you remember last week, it was just a bunch of nothing. This was the little bit of rain that we had. You can see it did predict ejecting spores, but no red lines. The red lines are what tell you there was an infection, because it was just too cold and it didn't rain for very long back on the 10th and 11th. But moving ahead here for the next several days, all these little rain events, they're predicting spore release quite a bit over the next few days, and they're predicting the potential for infections to be high for the Sparta station. I'll show you the Standale one in a second. It looks exactly the same, quite honestly. So here's the Standale data, and the one thing I wanted to point out about this, if you extrapolate out degree days to today, they're farther ahead down there. So 520 degree days base 32 since Green Tip. That puts them at about 65% mature spores. So areas to the south. The other interesting one is Alpine. They're a little bit farther, the weather station over at Tomey's. They're a little bit farther ahead too than the Sparta station, just slightly, but interesting to have those different data points. So we're moving into, this is a very crucial time. You need to tighten up your fungicides and stay covered as best you can. This is the same output from RimPro for Standale. Again, looks very similar to the Sparta one. Oh, I did throw in a farther north. The farthest north station in the district that I keep an eye on is at the Etna station at Fremont, there on Baseline Road. They're only at 370 degree days, base 32, so 33, about a third of the way through on mature spores. It's just a model that helps us decide, since we're not collecting spores in all these places. And I do have a RimPro site at one of the Fremont stations as well to kind of help keep track of that. Also on RimPro, you can look at mildew. I don't quite understand this model as well as the scab model, but I can try to explain it to you. Whenever there's this white area, that's saying that conidia are germinating. So powdery mildew overwinters inside the bud scales and inside crevices on the plant. And when they start to, those spores start to give off, or they're germinating, that's when they land on tissue and cause a problem. Well, there's only a slight risk, and that should make sense because it's been so cold. Mildew, while it doesn't need rainfall, in fact, it does better not in rainfall. It does better in really high relative humidity. It does not like cool temperatures. And actually, we've had the opposite of what mildew needs lately. We have had cool temperatures, and it's been very dry. You know, if you look at our dew points that were kind of scary with these cold mornings, you know, our relative humidity has been in the 20 to 30%, which is pretty dry for Michigan conditions. So looking forward, Not exactly sure what this means. It's putting rainfall in here, but like I said, you don't need rainfall. These blue bars are indicating rainfall for the future. You don't need rainfall to make mildew. You need warm temperatures. So I'll keep an eye on this, but my gut tells me we're moving into a time now where you definitely need to add something in for mildew now that we're moving into some warmer weather. Also for on RimPro, you can look at fire blight. And so I've actually started the Mary Blight model too for the areas. This is Standale, since they're a little farther ahead. I put in some pear bloom and I put in some apple bloom. And what this is showing is the risk with the rains. I'm going to explain it in Mary Blight a little bit better because it's more visual. To show you that each one of these is potential blossom blight infections. And when these black lines reach up into this orange area, that means you potentially have an infection. And then Sparta is showing the exact same thing, even though I started the bloom date a little bit later. So here's Mary Blight. I don't know why this just visually to me makes more sense. I'm sorry, the dog is barking. I started bloom today, but we could start it earlier if people want to tell me they had a few blooms open. I've only heard of a few things that are open. That's going to change over the next few days. And so once you put that into Mary Blight, then it starts this model down here where it gives you a risk rating. So today our risk is low. Thursday it's moderate, and perhaps high risk in some real early varieties that are sensitive to getting fire blight for Friday and Saturday rain, but then it drops back down to moderate as the rain chances drop off as well. And if you look at, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I had this blown up so it was easier to see. You can look at the EIP numbers here, not very high. You know, we really get nervous when the EIPs get up above 100. And someone's texting me, sorry. And we're not going to get close to that over the next several days. That's probably going to change next week with the forecast. So we'll see. I'll keep track of that for you. And then this is Standale. I started their bloom a little bit earlier, so they've got low risk here. Of course, there was no rainfall for the past several days. And they move into moderate to high risk. And they actually, next Monday, potentially could have had enough hours of some warm temperatures. It's this average right here that gets above 60, what really drives the EIP, which is the relative number of bacteria in blooms. So potentially fire blight is going to be a risk for us pretty much all next week as we move into bloom. So we'll just have to watch the weather with rain.
Okay, very good. I'm going to start out here with growth stages, which Amy already went over, and I know that everyone knows that we're going to be in full bloom next week. Our normal full bloom date is May 12th, and we're going to be 6 days behind that, maybe 7 days behind that, 42 days from first green tissue to full bloom or petal fall. So we'll watch this in the future. Trees are looking pretty peaked right now. That's because of the cold soil and dry soil. And so if you've got the leaves that are yellow and even burned a little bit from the frost, foliar nutrient sprays would be a good idea to put in during this time period, maybe some right after bloom as well. But you can see that they're not looking real perky. As soon as we get some warm weather, and of course this rainfall, it's going to really help the appearance of the foliage, and it will start to perk up again. As Amy talked about damage that we've seen here, some places get severe damage. I've been telling the media that we probably have maybe a 5% crop loss, but that might be wrong. This is a picture that Amy gave me. It's got ovaries cut, or the bud cut open, the flower cut open, and you can see that on the left-hand side there, the ovules are still healthy and nice and white. And if they're brown, then they're injured, they're dead. But if they're like this, where they're brown plus the receptacle and the whole pistil is really injured bad, you're not going to resurrect that. So you're going to have fruitlets that are between this good pitcher and this damaged pitcher. And this would make a good potential use of promelin to help set parthenocarpic fruit where you might have a lot of frost damage. So now the question is, when do we put promelin on? The frost occurred at tight cluster, open cluster back on May 9th, 10th, and you can, the label says spray within 24 hours, but is that the best time? We're going to try to answer that problem this year, but is that the best time? We think that pink, early bloom, and good bloom, full bloom are the best time to apply promelin to frost-damaged fruits. This is when the ovules will be trying to make up their mind, if they're alive, trying to make up their mind if they're going to set. I should say the fruitlet is trying to make up its mind if it's going to set. If its ovules are dead, it's in that transition stage. So I would suggest that if you haven't done it yet and you've got flower damage that's quite severe, you might want to consider putting on promelin or perlan. Perlan is material from Fine Americas. Put that on during the pink stage. We don't think that you should put on a second spray, but there is some people that are theorizing that a first spray at pink or early bloom, followed by a second spray at mid to late bloom, would be the best use of these materials to try to set the fruit. They will all be parthenocarpic with no seeds. Of course, if you have some ovules that are alive, you might get seeds in the fruit. So right now we're advising 1 pint per acre and put on a lot of water at the pink stage, which you're at right now. Over the next 3-4 days, you will be in that, what we think will be the best window to try to help with frost damage.
Hey, Phil, can you repeat that? It got goofy. I don't know if it was my internet or yours.
Okay.
1 pint, just the rate that you recommended.
1 pint of promelin in 100 gallons of water per acre, or 1 pint of perlan in 100 gallons of water per acre. At the pink stage to the early bloom stage, we think is the best target window. So after this rain comes up here, probably that would be the best timing for these materials to help protect frost, help repair frost damage to the extent that we can repair it. I'd like to move on to an article that was in Scaffolds last year by Garrett Cox and Anna Wallace. They had done some studies the last few years on using prohexadienone calcium, which is apogee and kudos. They actually use kudos in their studies, where they can maybe help with fire blight developing in the bloom stage. Here's a picture from Dr. George Sundin. You've seen this before, where apogee and kudos increase the cell density and increase the cell wall diameter, and this makes it difficult for fire blight to move down the stem up for shoot blight. But Cornell hypothesized that if they sprayed this on at pink, they could thicken the cell walls of the receptacle, which is in the picture here, of the flower, and thus preventing bacteria from moving down from the flower into the wood through the receptacle because of the thickening of the cell walls. Well, in 2018, they were actually able to thicken the cell walls, but it was noticeable about 40 days after their application. So they're in the process of doing a 3-year trial, and they have reported that they've reduced the incidence of blossom blight and subsequent shoot blight, where they've done this applying a Prohex spray at pink. It's still kind of early for us to adopt this as a full-blown practice, but if you have fire blight problems, you might want to start spraying at pink with Apogee or Kudos. They saw a response with rates as low as 3 ounces per 100 gallons, but it was stronger if they used a higher rate of 6 ounces per 100 gallons, and that would be 100 gallons of water per acre. So, Kudos or Apogee reduces blossom blight in their preliminary studies when it's applied at pink. And they inoculated their flowers in their studies. This does not mean you can not use bactericides that bloom. You still need to use those, but they've improved blossom blight control by using this early Apogee Kudos sprays. And of course, it has an immediate impact on shoot growth, but spraying it at that time at that low rate, 6 ounces per 100, the shoots will recover and catch up with the untreated shoots. So let me review this a little bit. We want to use Apogee or Kudos at pink to try to help ourselves with some blossom blight. But we also have been talking about using Apogee or Kudos for bitter pit control on honeycrisp trees. And this is a recommendation I have. Start at pink, which is coming up here in the next 4 days. Just 1 per acre, 100 gallons of water per acre on tall spindles. But if you got vertical axe or even small central leader trees, 8 ounces per acre is probably a better rate. And if you got really big trees, you need 12 ounces per acre on big trees. If you're using higher rates on your blocks, you can split those applications over time into 1 or 2 sprays or 3 sprays even. But that first one at pink is important for bitter pit control on honeycrisp. This comes from a study done by Dan Donahue out of Cornell, and the title says Apogee, but he actually used Kudos in this study, where he applies 6 ounces per acre at pink. But he also compared that to pink on applying split applications, 3 applications, and petal fall, and also petal fall at 3 applications. And you can see that he got the best control by applying those pink sprays. And I think that you can apply split sprays, although his data indicates the pink by itself is the best. I think it depends on the vigor of the honeycrisp trees that you're spraying. If you got big trees with lots of vigor, then you'll need more than 1 pink spray. You'll need a second spray, which probably will be about petal fall, and a third spray maybe at 10 millimeters. Those are all optional. In his data, he did not, in the second year there, it's got a red X, he did not apply Apogee 3 times, or excuse me, Kudos 3 times in that. So he didn't have any data for that. And he did the same thing on petal fall. He didn't apply just a single petal fall spray. So there is some data missing out of here, but generally it tells you that starting early will help suppress bitter pit problems, won't eliminate them. He also did this in 2019, but he didn't really have any significant differences in the treatments. It was low bitter pit year, and so the data, he has no data that means anything for 2019. If you take his data that I show you right here and combine it, and that's what I did with his data, you can see the pink spray with one spray only worked very well. And perhaps pink plus multiple sprays doesn't control quite as well. But I think that he's shown pretty well that pink is the time to start Apogee on Honeycrisp to help yourself suppress bitter pit. I'd like to now move on to Return Bloom and Honeycrisp. We know that Honeycrisp sets its buds for next year pretty early. And so we're suggesting that you start using NAA or NAD during bloom on Honeycrisp, applied every 7 days, 5 to 10 parts per million. This year, there's damage on the flowers. There's some kings that are gone, unless you had great frost protection. And where you didn't have frost protection, you had even more damage, but there's kings that are gone. And so we suggest that perhaps you wouldn't use the full rate on damaged Honeycrisp flowers. Just maybe use half. And if you feel uncomfortable with that, let this one go by, but start with the second spray at the 10 millimeters, at the petal fall stage. We don't want to over-thin Honeycrisp, so I'm thinking that half rate is the best process at this point. And that brings me to blossom thinning. We think it's important to blossom thin your Honeycrisp trees with caustic blossom thinners. That may not be the case for this year. You got damage on the bloom, especially the non-Honeycrisp. I would not do the blossom thinning if you got too much damage, if you see too much damage. But on Honeycrisp, you have so many flowers this year, and all those flowers that are healthy are going to produce gibberellins, and that gibberellins will start suppressing return bloom as soon as you get into full bloom. That's why we want to try to reduce the blooms on the trees with thinning and blossom thinning in a NAA program. And what would have even been better is to reduce the bud numbers earlier. Here's a program that Polly has. I've shown you this before. Basically, it's 3 to 4 ounces starting at full bloom all the way through every 7 days. Perhaps you might want to just go to 2 ounces where you have flower damage. Use half the rates that she suggests here per 100, and we're thinking of 100 gallons of water on a tall spindle tree per acre. I want to end with just a few slides on blossom thinning, and I'll talk more about this, but the earlier that we can thin our trees, the appropriate crop, the better off we'll be with quality and return bloom, and especially difficult to thin varieties. And this will help with return bloom on those biennial bearing trees such as Fuji and Honeycrisp. Of course, here's a picture of what lime sulfur and oil does to a flower when it works well. It burns the pistil, burns actually the style and the stigma on the flowers. The rate to use, if you don't have damage in their flowers or you had frost protection that gives you a nice healthy bloom to deal with, the rate to use is 2.5 gallons of lime sulfur and 2 gallons of oil per acre. Use the pollen tooth growth model to time these sprays, and we'll talk about that more next week. The pollen tooth growth model would suggest when you have those first set of flowers, that's your target crop. If on a tall spindle tree you want 100 apples, when you have 100 flowers open, the date and time that occurs is when you start the clock on this model. And then the model will tell you when those first 100 flowers are fertilized. And that's the time you need to spray with lime sulfur and oil. to control the flowers that open up after that but are not fertilized yet. The other choice that you could have is ammonium thiosulfate, and we suggest 1.5 or to 2 gallons per 100. Ammonium thiosulfate is safer than lime, sulfur, and oil, but it doesn't work like lime, sulfur, and oil. It just burns pretty much the stigmas, sometimes the styles. That means you have to spray it sooner than you would lime, sulfur, and oil. And I just saw a presentation by Terrence Robinson, and he's suggesting apply ATS at 60% of the pollen tooth growth model prediction. So that's early, and then apply it again with the next 60% for the second application. Typically, you get your 100 flowers, and usually that occurs about 24 hours after the first flower opens. And then you start your model, and usually about 2 to 3 days under normal conditions, 3 days, you'll have to make your first spray. And then about 2 or 3 days later, you'd have to make a second spray. So follow the pollen tooth growth model and do these 2 different things. You might only want to put on 1 caustic spray this bloom time because of potential damage that you might have in your flowers. Instead of doing 2, just plan on doing 1 at the appropriate time and see what sets, and then use your post-bloom growth regulators to help thin the crop. Lime, sulfur, and oil did a great job last year. We had a target crop load of 70 fruits per tree, and we got about 65 with 2 lime sulfur sprays. And our target fruit size was nearly 180 grams, and we almost got that too with lime forest last year, but we were using the 100% timing. So I'd like to stop there and see if there's any questions for Amy or I.